Recording the moment these things start gets into that natural flow, and then there's not this thing of okay, we're beginning.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, okay,
Welcome to.
I need to be more vigilant than I was a second ago because now the mic's on. Exactly.
Welcome to Why Different.
Welcome to Why Different, the podcast exploring neurodiversity with people in the creative industry. This is episode 8, and it's a pleasure to welcome my next guest, who is none other than Tristan Hunt, an ADHD coach for people in the music industry, helping them to thrive while navigating the challenges of ADHD within that particularly high pressure environment. Tristan's managed to combine his knowledge of ADHD following his late diagnosis with his long experience of working in the music industry, and that provides some really fascinating perspectives. I've been really looking forward to this episode, and it doesn't disappoint. We talked about a bunch of topics from childhood traumas and how they can be a link in a chain of events that lead to many of the behaviours and difficulties that people with neurodivergent conditions suffer with today. And some of the angles that aren't commonly talked about when considering addictions and how people get there. Packed with analogies and scientific information broken down. This is an amazing chat, and Tristan, I'll be in your ear to get you back because we weren't able to condense everything we wanted to discuss into one single episode. Now, without further ado, enjoy episode 8 with Tristan Hunt. Tristan, thank you for coming.
George, thanks for having me.
Tell me a bit about your story with neurodiversity. How has it shown up in your life?
So I got diagnosed with dyslexia when I was maybe 6 or 7. And this was back in the 80s. It's quite a while ago now, of course. And the understanding of neurodiversity wasn't what it is today. And my mum was told that I was stupid, I was just thick, that this dyslexia thing was just something that was an excuse for being stupid or thick. So that was my first sort of inroads to understanding that I had a neurodiverse conditions, because I also have dyscalculia. I really can't add up for toffee.
That's inability to handle numbers?
That's right, yes. It's sort of like number dyslexia. And that caused a lot of challenges in terms of my learning, of course. I didn't know that I had ADHD at the time. I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was 40, which is now 4 years ago. And of course, all three of those were showing up all the way through my primary school, through secondary school, onto university, when I did a master's some years later, and all the way through work. So this sort of later stage diagnosis has made a lot of sense of a lot of things, a lot of behaviours, a lot of successes and a lot of failures, addictions, a whole range of different things. I mean, my neurodiverse conditions have shaped my life, for better and for worse,
right,
and for a whole host of things in between. But yeah, it's been a journey.
It's a common description that better and for worse. And I think that's been the perspective that has resonated with me the most, because you hear about superpowers and stuff, and I appreciate the value in those statements to empower people and make them feel like they're not broken, which is often what people have been taught their whole life. And whereas there are elements that are great, there are elements that are not great, and they come about unexpectedly. I like how honest and upfront you are about that, because I think that gives license to then accept those feelings in yourself.
It's very personal how you choose to define your neurodiverse experience. That's personal, and it's yours to define as you so choose. I set up my ADHD coaching practice, so I'm a music industry ADHD coach specialising in helping people from the music industry, artists and professionals, with their ADHD in that context. But in the last sort of year and a half since I launched full time, I coach people from all around the world, North America, Europe, through to Australia, everywhere in between. Of the 140 plus people that I've worked with, not one has come to me and gone, do you know what, I really need help with my superpowers?
Yeah.
My cape keeps on getting caught in the door.
Yeah, exactly. What do I do about this?
This is really problematic. Flipping capes still at the dry cleaners. For most, it's more of a Clark Kent experience, if you like. You know, wear my glasses, tripping over themselves, all of these sorts of things. And obviously I'm being light about this, but people are coming with often significant challenges around their professional life, around their personal life, often both together,
Right.
that can have a dramatically adverse effect on their life experience. And it's not until that they get the understanding of how their ADHD in this case shows up for them and the mechanisms that sit behind it, that they can really make a change and sort of feel empowered about their condition and thrive within whatever space that they're in. But this notion of toxic positivity, where we are told your condition, your ADHD, your dyslexia, whatever it is, a superpower, that I think is problematic because it's not for anyone to tell you or me about how we feel about our conditions. If you choose to term it that way, that's yours and you're empowered to do so, and that's 100% cool. But I think there's a sort of growing notion from some parts of society, at least, that these are superpowers and it's all good. And of course, you and I both know that the lived experience can be quite different to that.
Yeah. Toxic positivity, it presents an unrealistic picture of life. It's like a distorted view. And I think there's room to put more perspective and show there are great elements, but they sit within a much bigger framework of life, which has goods and bads.
Absolutely. And the more judiciously we use social media, the better. In my coaching agreement, we talk about this idea of not using our phones for the first and last hour of each day, and there's a reason for that. This sort of old adage, if you win the morning, you win the day, it can be very true for people with ADHD, that if we can get ourselves off on the right foot, and behind this is a lot of detail, of course, but if we can get ourselves into a place at the start of the day where we've got nice positive momentum, with a clearer head, with greater focus, giving attention to things we want to give attention to rather than the multiple impulses and distractions that are coming at us from all different angles, then the better a day we'll have. But of course, social media can do the opposite. We can go on there to scroll, to self-medicate, to self-soothe, because we're feeling stressed. Maybe we wake up stressed about that thing we did yesterday, anxious that we didn't do it quite right, that social interaction, that thing at work, and we then zoom in on that and we can go to a real negative thought spiral about that, moving from the task positive networks, here and now goal orientated focus thinking, into the default mode networks, another set of brain regions that are responsible for our conceptual sense of self, thinking about past and future, but also where we can do this sort of ADHD spiral of catastrophic thinking, zooming on a particular point. All of this can happen within a few minutes of us waking up, right? And the day hasn't even started. And we pick the phone up to self-soothe, Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is that we're looking at, news. And of course it can go well, it can calm the mind, and the mind produces more dopamine. We go online, we get a big spike of dopamine, that makes us feel good for a while. But of course we can see something on there where we compare ourselves to someone else, and this need that people often have, that have ADHD, of often constantly wanting some external validation. Is what I'm doing right? Am I right? Am I okay? And we can talk in sort of more detail as to, if you like, as to why people feel that. But that certainly all it takes is to see that one friend or person they aspire to be doing better than them in some way, whatever better means to them. And then the rest of the day's for naught, because that thought gets lodged in their mind very firmly. What's the point in doing the thing that I'm doing? Because there's loads of other people doing it better. I'll never be able to do it that well. I'll never be able to do it perfect. Yeah. Talk about perfectionism. And of course that can have a really negative impact on our whole day. So this is this idea of moving away from social media and things like that, certainly in a sort of more passive way to something that's more elective, can be very helpful.
You touched on traumas that puts people into negative thought patterns and spirals. I want to go back to your formative years, because I imagine you've reflected on your childhood quite a lot and see it in a different way to how you did at the time. I'm interested to know what role negative messaging plays in your life and what you've learned about it when you look back.
I have a lot of compassion for little me, which I didn't for many years. I did a piece of psychotherapy work that lasted for just over a decade, 1,100 hours on the couch, trying to understand my mind better. And a big part of that...
How many?
1,100.
Wow.
Yes, I was going 3 times a week at one stage for about 5 years. Wow. So very intensive. I'm a huge advocate of psychotherapy. I would just add the caveat that now, with the understanding I have about neurodiverse conditions, ADHD specifically, my therapist changed my life. She probably saved my life, I think. But for a psychotherapist to not have a deep understanding of ADHD can be problematic because they're looking at it from a certain lens, and we really need to have both lenses, the neurobiological lens of understanding ADHD and also the psychoanalytic lens, if you like, to really understand how somebody's challenges are showing up for them, specifically where the root causes of those challenges are.
I'm liking these words you're using.
Or you can definitely dive in more detail if you like. The questions around my childhood, I was very negative about my experience as a kid for many years as an adult because it was so profoundly negative. I grew up in a loving family with a growing group of good friends, some of whom I've known since early childhood, and they're still firm friends now. Right. But nonetheless, I was bullied from the moment I started primary school, all the way through secondary school in different ways. And then I've experienced a lot of that through my professional life as well. And I think this is something that a lot of people with ADHD experience in different ways often, because they are more sensitive. Our neurobiology means that we are wired differently. We're actually, from a nervous system point of view, wired differently. Touch, taste, sight, sound, smell. You know, we all experience these often to much more amped up degrees. Yeah. Some people, all of them. Some people, one specifically. But emotionally, we're more sensitive. But we can be quite naive, and we can not get social cues, and we can put ourselves into more vulnerable situations. And we have an impaired working memory. So we can't remember the thing we did last time that put us into that negative. Like you're
100%.
Putting your hands up when it resonates.
Yeah, I've just thrown my hands up in the air.
Yeah. No, I feel you.
Speaking from my mind.
Right, and it's often a shared experience that we can have, unfortunately. And that was compounded by the fact that I had dyslexia, ADHD, dyscalculia. There was no real success. Like academically, I failed. Socially, I felt like I failed a lot. And when you combine that with the conditions, that can create a very negative sense of self-image, if there is a sense of self-image at all, which obviously feeds into sort of adult life. But my ability to focus as a kid on the schoolwork I was doing, it was, looking back, it was pretty non-existent, really.
So that sounds like a rough time. And, you need elements that stimulate you. So much of your ability to do anything is from your ability to be stimulated to do it. And through our years, the education system was designed by people who thought didactic teaching and traditional subjects was the only way to be successful. And that was probably their experience, and that's all they knew. If you want to have money, then do well in school, etc. But now we understand that you can be successful in absolutely anything you want to do, because there's always going to be something that's going to have value to other people. And that's the essence of success, having value to other people. And so whatever your niche might be, if you can be stimulated, inspired, encouraged to do it, that's like the key. But it sounds like the traditional subjects weren't stimulating you, weren't inspiring for you. But then you could become sort of a target. Like teachers get frustrated with you because their job's harder, and other students may think there's nothing to admire about you. I was fortunate I did find that school, and that brought a lot of social capital. But if you weren't doing well at sports or I'm not saying that you weren't doing well at sports, but
no, I wasn't.
You can see that led people to be a target, and I didn't experience that, but I was sensitive to it for people who were. And a lot of the people who would get bullied and perhaps weren't traditionally smart, in inverted commas, they're some of my best friends. And I could identify with that, probably because I was getting negative messages in other areas of my life. Where were the negative messages typically coming from?
My lived experience, all the sort of classic negative messages I guess we often hear people with ADHD share about their lived experience, which is that I'm no good, I'm stupid, I'm rubbish. I don't have a touchstone of positivity here that I can go back to. Like you're saying, you're clearly a smart guy. I'm experiencing you as somebody that's probably like high functioning with ADHD. You've gone into plastics. One of my friends is one of the top consultants in South Africa in plastics, trained over here, did his residencies here and stuff. So sure. I have an insight from him just how very difficult that job is and what is required to operate at the level that you operate at. So that level of smarts, I think, as you rightly said, can carry you through school and academic life, even if you're struggling in these other areas. It buys you a lot of social cachet, puts a lot of social cash in the bank. Whereas my social cachet, or there were moths in my bank, shall we say? There wasn't much going on there, and that made school very challenging. It made that whole period very, very challenging. But I think it fostered in me this sense of knowing I had more in me and wanting to find out what that was, and knowing all the way through, right up to now, that I could be more than I was if I could find the right thing to do. Which comes back to your point earlier around interest, from an ADHD perspective. If we can find the thing that interests us, that creates dopamine, then we can thrive. And for the sort of people listening to this, I guess it can be helpful to understand that if you've got ADHD, you're generally showing up for work. I'm using air quotes there around work in one of two states. Either there's interest, so interest equals dopamine, that neurotransmitter that our brains are chronically lacking. Brains produce more of it in interesting situations. Or we've got urgency with severe consequences. This is deadlines. When we're in deadline-driven, structured environments like that, then the brain produces noradrenaline, norepinephrine, if you're in the States, one of the same, and we can suddenly focus, but that can be very anxiety-provoking and stressful. So we've got, one hand, dopaminergic situations, on the other hand, we've got sort of noradrenaline situations, and sometimes there's a situation perhaps where you've got the two running together. But anything in the middle is extremely difficult for us to do, which is often most of life, of course. It's the taking out the trash, it's the sending of the emails or the messages, doing the invoicing, getting your end of year accounts done. And through school, of course, there's just endless amounts of things you're not interested in, which of course makes it very difficult to dig in and get going. So it was about learning from school that I needed to find something that really interested me, and that was really my journey to becoming a music industry ADHD coach.
Talking about things that stimulate you and give the brain the neurotransmitters that you need to be able to focus, be fulfilled and happy. If you don't have those things, then I don't know that this is true, could the school experience actually be quite damaging, depriving the brain of neurotransmitters by not catering to subjects or topics that are going to stimulate that brain, like depriving soil of water.
I think that's a great way to put it. Sorry to jump in, but I think that's such a good point, that the soil that we give our children is often wrong for them. The education system is set up in such a way, without wanting to get too political, to perpetuate capitalism. What we want is nice little taxpayers that are trained up to go and get good paying jobs, jump through all of the hoops, go through the round holes, and go and be a good member of society. And of course, we know from the research that's out there, certainly around 3.5 to 4.5% of the UK population has ADHD. Dyslexia, I think, is around somewhere between 8 and 12%. In totality, we're looking, and I'm probably underestimating this from the figures I can remember, but somewhere between like 25 to 30% of the UK population has one or more neurodiverse conditions. And of course, we often have, with ADHD especially, coexisting conditions. So I mentioned earlier, I've got dyslexia and dyscalculia alongside my ADHD. We have Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, a whole range of different conditions that can exist around this. All of that's to say that there's a high percentage of the population that is not being catered for from childhood. So of course, what you're doing then is you are creating generation after generation that has this sense of failure because they are a square peg, to use this particular analogy, that won't go through society's round hole.
Right.
And this is why we see such high rates historically of children with neurodiverse conditions failing at school, failing, again in air quotes, by other people's standards. Why do we see such a large number of people within our prison service having neurodiverse conditions? Dr. Tony Lloyd, who I work with at the ADHD Foundation, I'm a guest lecturer for the ADHD Foundation's ADHD Professional Coaching Diploma course.
It's amazing.
Yeah, huge honour. They asked me to talk on it this year, and I was delighted to do so. He spends quite a lot of time with government, going into prisons and speaking with people that have neurodiverse conditions within those settings. And of course, if you fail at school, the chance of you getting into interesting things that are stimulating, things that maybe aren't good for you or even legal, increases dramatically. Rates of addiction for people that have ADHD, specifically 70 to 75% greater than the general population. So all of this is to sort of circle back, is to say that, to your soil analogy, if you will, because society still refuses to give children the right soil in which to flourish that have neurodiverse conditions, we are setting them up for failure again and again. And if you are gifted, or if you are high functioning, great, this is very positive stuff. Or if you're particularly athletic, if you have some attributes that can carry you through, great, that can go a long way. But if you're just averaging or middling, or not even getting that high, then there's really not much there for you. And this isn't the child's fault. Because of a lack of infrastructure, the right soil for them, they're being set up to fail. So that, I think, is something that radically needs to change. Yes, our schooling systems are inadequate for people with neurodiverse conditions.
Yeah. If we go back to the peanut butter sandwich analogy, after lunch, that kid has PE and they don't do very well. They're too tired. And the teacher's like, why didn't you eat anything?
That's right. Yeah. How are you meant to be fueled for the work you're doing if you're not nourished?
Exactly. Yeah. This is a safe space for wild tangent analogies. When you're talking about the square peg round hole, I was thinking about the round hole being the pathway that society allows you. And though you're a square peg, you have to try and get through it. So if you think it, for example, a wooden square peg, if you force it through that round hole, on the other side, does it look like a nice round circle like the other ones? No. It looks damaged and frayed, and not the version of itself you would have if you're able to square off the hole.
I love that analogy. I think that's a brilliant analogy, because it so eloquently summarises what we're left as on the other side of that process. That all of the magic and the joy and the abilities that people with ADHD often have are sheared off them by being pushed through this hole. That their ability to think in a non-sequential way, which is part of one of the gifts, if you like, of ADHD brains, which I see show up the whole time, of course, within the music industry where I work and still work now. Worked in the music industry for 20 years, over 20 years now. I'm still very much part of it. I'm going to the International Music Summit in Ibiza next week for annual music industry conference there.
Wicked.
Spoke at 7 different music industry conferences last year around the world on this topic, and it's great to see that getting much more attention. But this idea that people who are household names, I work with main stage artists that you'd be familiar with on Glastonbury, Coachella, all of these sorts of things, Grammy-nominated, award-winning Brit, Mobo, Ivan Novello, all of these sorts of folk, right the way through to people that are just starting up, that are working in A&R, sync, publishing, whatever it might be, and everyone in between, like C-suite individuals. So many of these people have ADHD, they have neurodiverse conditions, and they're the beating heart of our creative industries, right? These people are absolutely the beating heart of the music industry. But yet we have a school system, we have an education system that pushes those square pegs, those creatives with those brilliant minds, through these round holes and shears off the best bits of them. And then, of course, how does the person feel after that? I have nothing to offer because I can't meet society's expectations.
I think you're so right there. Such an important point to touch on, particularly in the creative industries, and particularly at the time we're living in, where artificial intelligence is trying to simulate creativity. AI is great at taking information we already have and adapting it to make something that seems new, but isn't. So preserving the enthusiasm of creatives is really important for us looking forward. But the question is, how do we do that? There are probably a number of ways. One that comes to mind, people need to have the chance to understand the neurodivergent experience, because there's a lot of noise and people who talk about it without knowing. For example, journalists talking every time somebody of prominence gets diagnosed with ADHD, like a comedian or an artist. The next day, the articles are, there's another person who's got ADHD, here's another person, as if it's this ballooning kind of sham. And none of that is true. This is almost certainly happening because people are becoming more aware and there's more acceptance, people are more willing to explore it, and because we are more able to spot it in ourselves and others. That's certainly one of the reasons why people are seeing more diagnoses of ADHD. Also because it's so intertwined with shame. People haven't been willing to expose themselves by declaring that actually they might have ADHD. So those are a couple of reasons why it's more common. But despite that, it's likely that people who are not neurodivergent still can't identify. And that's why there's so much value in people who have experience of ADHD sharing what that experience is like, because it's such an invisible condition that if you don't experience it, there's a really high chance that you have actually no idea what it really is like. And if you think you do, you probably don't. And that can be frustrating. It's human nature that when people don't understand something and keep seeing it or being presented with it, they start to get frustrated by it.
Absolutely.
And the next step when they see it again is to try and push back against it. That's happening to an increasing degree. And the problem is it takes the focus away from people who struggle with the intensity of the negative elements of ADHD. And that focus is important.
I think that's right. I was commissioned by the Musicians Union last year to write a part of their website on working with neurodiverse musicians. And it looks at ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, autism, and how these show up for people, and also the sorts of things that we can do, also as individuals with these conditions, but also as colleagues to these people, can make reasonable adjustments in terms of how we work with one another. And just by making those very simple adjustments, and a lot of them are, it's just how we communicate, rather than me sort of sending you 1,000 emails. Is it better for us to have a face-to-face conversation and talk it through? Maybe followed up by some bullet points, so you've got a nice, clear summary of what was discussed. There's a range of different things that can be done, and that was very much the purpose of that. Exactly to your point there. Knowledge is power, of course, and the more informed people are, the more able we are to meet our fellows, colleagues, friends, whoever it might be, at their level. And then, of course, that changes the game.
100% agree.
Because individuals with neurodiverse conditions aren't any longer a square peg. They are, maybe they're not even a peg anymore. Let's just leave the peg analogy. But what we're talking about here is enabling individuals to be individuals and thrive on their own terms, rather than some horrible societal construct which can really limit their success.
I want to ask about the music industry. Tell me about your path into that.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, actually, I went to university, and people might be listening to this going, hang on a second, this guy's going on about how he failed at school and it was real. And he went to university. I managed to blag my way through school, and I got through clearing to Southampton Uni, which is a Russell Group University at the time.
Yeah.
Decent uni. Lots of my friends who are medics went there. But I went through clearing. I was never going to go to university. That was never a thing. I was in Botswana at the time, on a year out gap year. My friend, he's now like a producer director for Netflix. He went off to Cambridge, did very well academically. Called me up and he was like, mate, you got, I think I got a B in English instead of a C that I thought I was going to get. I was like running around the house. And this was back in the day where people, throwing money into a phone to make a long distance phone calls back in the late 90s. And I picked up the receiver and it just flat dial tone, he'd gone. But that then meant that I could apply to university, went through clearing, went to Southampton. And I was in a record shop there soon after starting, and I was just complaining to the guy in the record shop. I was like, there's nowhere to go, man. There's no scene here, all this other stuff. And I had this hand on my shoulder, I turned around, there's this very moody looking skinhead guy standing behind me, who later became my friend. And it turned out that he was a local promoter, about 10 years older than me at the time. And he ran a club with his business partner called Squeeze 18. So Squeeze was like this sort of long-running underground night that had been going in Southampton for many years, and I started promoting for them. And we worked with people like African Bambata, Easy Rollers, DJ Markey, you name it, Goldie, all sorts of folk. It was very much a little underground club. I got really into the promotion side of things, and I was taking a lot of drugs at the time. Okay, so I got really into my MDMA. So the one time for me through this period that I could actually feel normal was on MDMA, and it's still like a compound which I have personally for my own self so much respect for, because it enabled me at that point in my life to let the anxiety go. This was pre-coaching, counselling, therapy. I hadn't done any of that work. So it was a very helpful chemical crutch, which quite conveniently also went very well with the music that I was listening to. And I absolutely love dance music. So I was doing... Go on, please.
No, carry on, sorry.
So I got into that through uni. I was doing that through my terms. And then I went to Ibiza for a season. Friends like, do you want to come to Ibiza? I'd been very briefly before. I was like, yeah, okay, let's go and do a season in Ibiza. I then spent the next 3 seasons working in Ibiza, doing lighting for the clubs, meeting lots of people. And that was really my sort of inroad into the electronic music industry.
Wow. Sounds like you felt at home, or you felt comfortable in the environment of the industry. Was that what was taking you back to Ibiza?
Yeah, very much. I met my tribe. I met like-minded people, really good people that I'm still friends with now. This is over 25 years ago now. And I just met really good people.
Yeah.
And that felt safe, and that felt like a nice environment. And we were all into the same things. And that, of course, creates an environment where you feel secure and empowered to do the things that you want to do. And of course, that feeds into confidence, etc. And I ended up getting a job working for a record label at the time, which was a big deal for me because it was like, it's my favourite record label. And they were doing stages with 10,000 people at Creamfields and Gatecrasher, which were the big, big festivals at the time. And I was doing stage management and artist liaison. So I got into this space where I was getting to do stuff with people that I really respected and in an environment that I loved. And so that was the beginning of my interest, right? So there we go. The interest has been seeded and was by this stage already starting to grow.
That's amazing you just said that, because I was about to say you found your soil and you said it's been seeded.
Thank you, George. Yeah. Well looped round.
It's a really nice story, and it fits that you find the environment that is safe for you. And safe is an important word to focus on, because that's the platform from which you can then start to thrive.
Definitely. A lot of people with ADHD have trauma with a small t. Things like bullying, for example. A lifetime of underachievement, being told that they're stupid, failing at jobs. And that compounds negatively in their mind's eye as to what they can and can't do. Of course, and finding a safer space where you're around like-minded people who tell you it's okay to be you, so important.
Yeah, I really like the authentic you.
Yeah, exactly.
So what were the next steps in the music industry?
I spent some time working in production, so light, sound, all of those sorts of things in the UK. Went to Australia for a year, working for the big festivals, doing stage management, artist liaison. I came back over here, I got into the rights and royalties side of things, and then spent the last 4.5 years working for the Association for Electronic Music, which is the global trade body for the genre, travelling the world, talking at conferences, doing panels, helping champion things like mental health. One of my key focuses there was helping people better understand within the music industry the importance of mental health. And this was a period where, very sadly, Tim Bergling of Avicii took his life, and Keith Flint from The Prodigy as well. Yeah. And it was the first time, really, I think, that the music industry had given the focus that it needed to this subject. Because up until then, if I go back to Ibiza back in the late 90s, early noughties, this sort of quite laddish, competitive drug-taking vibe was there. People were going out and it was about how long can you stay up, how long can you stay out, not showing any weakness, doing crazy hours, crazy touring, all of these sorts of things. And to show any weakness or to talk to people in a way that was vulnerable was quite taboo. But it was only around maybe 2015, 2016 that the industry started to get a real grip and go, hang on, people are dying here. And they're dying needlessly because of a toxic environment that we've allowed to happen. How can we change that? And so I like to think that was some small part, at least, of that change in championing ideas around environments which were healthier for people, that catalysed better mental health. Going back to that idea of soil, that changed the soil into something that was more nourishing for the people that were working in the music industry and in all aspects of it.
Right. It's really necessary, and it's a shame that it has to take deaths for it to come about. I won't go into it much further than to say the whole show no weakness culture. It's oxymoronic in that The whole reason to want to show no weakness is you're not feeling safe. Like when a rattlesnake starts rattling, it's showing no weakness essentially, but actually it's showing no weakness because it's terrified. And so where you have that show no weakness culture, you don't realise that actually what a lot of these people need is help, support or reassurance. But it's hard to receive help unless you present as somebody who needs it. And society hasn't historically been comfortable to accept that this actually exists. Like, people do feel afraid, men do feel afraid, and they do need to escape. And going to a club, for example, isn't necessarily a act of hedonism. It's often because they are sort of understimulated. And like you're saying, which I think is a really important point, we're talking about drugs and getting addicted. And if anybody, can think of a time when they were understimulated, feeling low, it could be something traumatic has happened in your life, or maybe not even that, but we all know that feeling of feeling a degree of low. Think about if that was how you felt more often than not, and that was just your existence in life. But then you go to a club, and whether or not you take drugs, that brings you a little bit closer to the normal level. It makes sense that you're going to try and repeat that. And unfortunately, because drugs are addictive, you then become a victim of those. Working in A&E for many years, I've seen people come in every week, similar to the whole narrative about drugs getting addicted and it being a choice that people have made. Take 1 minute to sit down with that thought and think, why would somebody choose to end up in this situation if there wasn't an underlying problem that they were trying to correct?
Definitely. The word choice implies volition, of course, that this is elective. And more often than not, it's quite the opposite, that we don't want to spend 45 minutes, an hour just scrolling on our phone. We want to go and live our life and be connected to people. But as folk with ADHD, we can find ourselves doing that, or researching for 10 hours straight, or gaming, or whatever it might be, because there's something wonderfully self-soothing about that. The circus of our minds, that the noise gets quietened down for a while, we're zoomed in on a central point. And gosh, doesn't that feel calming and relaxing? And lots of dopamine being generated. We feel, for a time, soothed, because the brain is in pain. And the brains of us folk with ADHD are chronically under-aroused. Again, unless we're doing something that's of sufficient interest. And so, of course, people do take drugs. They do go out and use alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, nicotine, caffeine, the 5 main drugs that people with ADHD often find themselves using alongside phones and screens. We'd see it a lot within the dance music industry, across the music industry as a whole perhaps, the sort of self-medicating behaviours. But there was no resource for people to go to and go, do you know what, help, I'm struggling. It's only recently, and the last 10 years or so, that's been a resource. So even if you felt comfortable enough to unmask and go, hey, I think I've got this thing and I'm really struggling, who are you reaching out to? Again, it's only latterly that we've had those resources in place for people to even go to somewhere where they can feel safe. And I'm sort of like groups like the MITC, the Music Industry Therapist Collective, where you've got a dedicated group of experienced music industry professionals who have also worked in the industry for many decades, who've retrained as psychotherapists. My industry colleague and friend, Matthew Bushwacka, who might come on to later around music, lives just around the corner, very well respected DJ, retrained as a psychotherapist. So you now have these people that have the lived experience of what the challenges of addiction and other things might present, but trained up sufficiently to be able to help from a mental health perspective. And increasingly there's a greater number that also have the understanding of neurodiversity. And what is this all kind of moving towards? It's moving towards an environment within the music industry that is far more inclusive and accepting, and providing a space and spaces where people can hopefully unmask in a way that is safe to them and get the support that they need. So that's a huge step change, and it's obviously very heartening to see. Are we where we need to be yet? No, there's still a long way to go, but it's definitely moving in the right direction.
It's fulfilling to hear an esteemed DJ and producer like Bushwacka using his experiences, both bad and good, to contribute, because he recognises how significant an impact it has. You used a term that I'd not heard of. You said the brain is in pain. It hit the nail on the head. Even more so because you then listed off a number of drugs.
Caffeine, nicotine, cannabis, cocaine and alcohol. They're often seen as the 5 main go-to drugs that people with ADHD use to self-medicate.
Yeah. Interestingly, a lot of those take away pain. cocaine is an anesthetic that takes away pain. And alcohol is analgesic. So before, when they were doing operations without anesthetic, they would give hard spirits to get through the operation. So when you talk about the brain being in pain and you see, in a sense, attempts at therapy, it's interesting how several of them drugs give relief of pain.
Absolutely. There's a guy called Dr. Gabor Mate, who you might be familiar with, who ran an addiction centre in Vancouver. He's now retired. Also has some views on ADHD. His book, Scattered Minds, is very interesting in parts, but I don't necessarily agree with the root causes he feels ADHD comes from. He places, I think, an over-emphasis on these sort of socialisation, societal parts that can enable the ADHD gene in people to be expressed. That's his thinking. I'm more of the school which is widely held by experts within the current field of ADHD, that it's far more genetic. That is the main sort of driver behind the condition, if you will. But he talks very eloquently in his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, a fantastic book on addiction, about just this point, which is that addiction serves a very helpful purpose for the brain. It's about trying to soothe pain. I say helpful, it seems to the brain like it's a good idea. I'm in lots of pain, I'm going to take cocaine, whatever else it might be. But of course, it's only momentary. But if you don't have any other tools, if you haven't been to counselling, psychotherapy, done the self-work, what else is there? I remember when I was, drinking heavily and doing a lot of coke, and no one saw this, so I got away with it because I was working in the industry and I showed up to do all the stuff I needed to do, and you play out this partying, whatever else.
High function.
I was wrecked from Friday to Sunday, just because I needed to turn this pointing at my head, I needed to turn it off because it was just exhausting. And it wasn't until I had a scare, found myself in hospital, that I was like, okay, I was fine, I was fine, but it was like there was a wake-up call. But up until around that point, I hadn't had the tools to be able to manage it. And the idea, I remember my psychotherapist said to me, like, I think you're an addict. I was like, the rage that came up, it took me about 3 weeks to process that. But that came from don't take my drugs away.
Yeah.
Okay. And I notice this within the coaching that I do now, that when we talk about like phone use and stuff, people are, I'm fine with my phone. And we find out that these everyday behavioural addictions are on the similar continuum, obviously maybe not as problematic, but they're getting in the way of life. They're atrophying the parts of the brain that we need to be stronger in the prefrontal cortex. I'm pointing at the front part of our brain here, where we have the psychological term executive functions, planning, time management, organisation, execution, working memory. Every time we task switch, we're moving between phones and screens and this and that, and we're weakening the part of the brain that wants to be stronger. We've got the mid-cingulate cortex and the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, these parts that are vital to bringing our attention and execution. And so we want to do things that are more conducive to strengthening that part of the brain, these addictive behaviours that they're clearly not. So to circle back to the point, yes, addiction is often a means, the brain's best guess at how to solve pain.
Now let's move on to the last part of the episode, the 3 pivotal tracks. I love this bit because this is your opportunity to share with us 3 tracks that tell us something about you, either because they have a particular significance to you, maybe they represent a particularly poignant event or time in your life, or perhaps because they tell us more directly something about the way your brain works, and maybe something about your neurodiversity. So, Tristan, you're up. What's your first track?
So I think we've got in there LK by DJ Mory and XRS featuring Stamina MC.
Yes.
See, all I know is this tune tears up nothing to you. So anytime we're around, this is what we do. It's the way that we play this sound. It's the way.
Takes me back again to sort of those days where I got into promoting and we had Marky come down and play on a boat in Southampton. The poor guy looked absolutely terrified. He'd just flown in from Brazil, and we brought him out on a launch to play on this boat with about 300 people. And the guy's got one of the decks upside down and he's scratching. And it's an insane DJ. So that track takes me back to that time because I was peaking then. And I remember talking to Stamina, the MC involved, and he was like, mate, we've just been on top of the pops. It's the sickest thing ever.
That's crazy.
And he's got like this big old drum and bass MC going, I love Top of the Pops when I was a kid and I'm on it. You know? Although it was a bit like front with drum and bass sometimes, and it just all gone just pure joy. So that was certainly one of them. And then I think
I love that. Top of the Pops in the UK, before we had satellite TV, just terrestrial. The hit show of the week, Friday nights, half an hour. It's a big deal to be on there.
Massive, massive.
Iconic. Everybody who was around the scene at that time recognises it. What about it really speaks to you? Is it mostly the experience of the time?
Yeah, it's the experience of the time. It's that sense of connection. I felt a very strong sense of connection to the people I was with at that particular time in my life. And yeah, that's what it evokes now.
Amazing.
Very positive.
Amazing. What's your second track, Tristan?
We've got Yeke
Yes.
by Mory Kante and the Hardfloor remix. It's just Ibiza. I spent 3 seasons working in Ibiza. That would come on, I'd be doing laser engineering, which was basically running this laser in a club called Privilege, at the time the world's largest club, 12,000 capacity, for a night called Manumission, which was like fairly outrageous hedonistic night at the time. And I would project this laser onto a water curtain and it would go through onto the far side of the wall. You've got aeroplane hanging from the ceiling and you've got people on ropes pirouetting down and just all sorts of insanity. People would come up to me and they'd be like, have you got a lighter? And I would light their cigarette off the laser and give it back to them. That was my party piece at the time.
Yeah.
And that tune was just ubiquitous to that time, so it just takes me back to Ibiza. Again, that feeling of connection that we often also look for was very much around that tune.
It's a very cool track and a cool remix of it. It's quite different from the original, but still quite high energy. He was from Guinea, I think. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think sadly he passed away in the last year or two.
And tell me, your third one.
So we've got the Billie Jean remix by Bushwacka. Came out again similar time. So this is when I was going to Fabric a lot, and I remember it being played there. I'd just come back from Ibiza and hearing it on the Space Terrace like all season, and I was there with my friends. And James Lavelle was playing in the main room from Mowax, and the intro came and it's got a really long intro before it drops.
It out, right?
I think the track's like 12, 13 minutes, and I just freaked out. And my friends are like, "What's?" You know, I'm there with 20 of my mates at the time. Big group has gone down, and we're taking over the main stage in there, and I'm bouncing around going, "This tune." And then, of course, when it dropped, everyone's familiar with Billie Jean, and then just the whole place went bonkers. It's absolutely nuts. So again, it's just got those memories. And of course, when I hear these tracks now in a club, because I'm still going to clubs and festivals, it takes me straight back to those moments.
Wicked. It's such a good remix of the classic Billie Jean. Amazing. Tristan, you're a busy man. Where can listeners find you?
My website is tristanhunt.co.uk. I'm on Instagram as Tristan Hunt UK, on LinkedIn as Tristan Hunt. And the note which I made earlier around the Musicians Union. So if people have questions and they're working specifically in the music industry or elsewhere, because actually a lot of this applies, around how to work as a neurodiverse person or with neurodiverse people, that resource is on the Musicians Union's website, which perhaps we can pop into the show notes. There's a link there. So yeah, that's where I am.
Before you go, final question. What's the best bit of advice that you've heard that relates to neurodiversity in the last few years?
That's a big question. It's a very good question. I think this idea of radical honesty, of really understanding who we are as an individual, which can be probably most safely and well explored in therapy if you're not at a point to do this by yourself, is so key to unmasking, because unless we really understand ourselves, what is it that we want from life? Who are we? We could have spent an entire lifetime people-pleasing, showing up for other people, trying to be perfect for society, doing all of these things that aren't really for us, they're for other people. And of course, we've conditioned ourselves in this way that's not really us. You know? And it's only through doing that sort of bit of introspective thinking, which again, I'm a huge advocate of psychotherapy and things like that, to do this work, that we can really identify perhaps what it is that we want. And of course that can sound quite selfish, but it's not. If we're doing the things that we want, we're living in our zone of genius, if you will, those things that we're great at, like yourself, moving into plastics, then we can help other people. We're thriving, we have a better quality of life, a nicer vibe, other people feel and experience that, so it benefits not just ourselves but also our family and friends.
Put your oxygen mask on first before helping others.
Every time.
Brilliant. Tristan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Pleasure. To find all of our episodes, follow us and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you find your podcast. That will keep you up to date with new episodes as they come out. You can also find out more about what we're up to, who we're interviewing, and more information about neurodiversity and creativity by following us on our Instagram @_wireddifferent. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode.